Welcome everyone. I can see quite a few people logging in, joining us. So welcome everyone. I'm just going to wait a few more seconds to give all the attendees some time to log in. I know some of us are relatively new to Zoom webinar, and I know some people have to log in. So I'll give you all a few minutes to log in. But welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And I had a question before, so we are going to be recording this session because some people have asked me to see the recording because unfortunately they had some commitments this afternoon. So just a note that we will be recording this session. So I just wanted to share that before we get started. I can see a few familiar names. Welcome Shaina, welcome Jamie. Welcome, Jean-Carl, Georgina, a lot of familiar faces, although I can't see you. I can see your name, so thanks for joining us today. Hi, Steve. Hi, Sean. Hi, Sarah, Rosie, Marine. It's great to see you. All right, so I know some of you are on a schedule, so we're just going to get started and hopefully everybody can continue to join. But first and foremost, welcome to the launch of the Successful Hybrid Team. Today is a very special day, of course, for me, but for, I guess, the whole diversity and inclusion community. Obviously, the launch of this book is the result of a very long project that started about 1.5 years ago, nearly 2 years ago. So it's a very special day today. So thanks for joining us today. Also, I would like to extend a big thank you to our fantastic guest speakers today who are taking the time to be with us. So thank you, Kate, who is Executive Director Consulting at CBRE UK. Thank you, Lucy, Head of Talent at 8 Road. And thank you, Marcell, Global Talent Acquisition at Adidas. Thanks for joining us today. I would also like to extend a big thank you to Wiley, my publisher, who obviously believed in this project enough to support me all the way. So thank you, Wiley, for being part of this project and helping me making this possible. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Perrine Farque. I'm an author, TEDx speaker. I like to speak and share ideas, whether it's through writing or speaking. And of course, I'm very passionate about creating diverse and inclusive brands and companies that employees and customers love. So today I'd love for this session to be very interactive. So please use the Q&A. If you're new to Zoom, there is a Q&A box. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please use that Q&A button. If you're an attendee, you can raise your hand as well. There is an option to raise your hand. We will have a live Q&A with you from the audience in about 50 minutes. And we will read your questions. So please write your comments, write your questions, write your ideas and your stories in the Q&A now. Don't wait until the end because Flor, my colleague here, will read the questions. She will have a look at your questions and we will answer all your questions and your comments at 5:50. So please don't be shy. We want this to be very interactive. Also, you feel free to connect, or I encourage you to connect with our panelists on social media. So I think they're all very friendly, and I think they all welcome more obviously connection. So feel free to send our panelists a connection request on LinkedIn or other social media channels. And of course, any unanswered questions will be answered after the event if we're out of time. And finally, today, we're going to spend the first 15-20 minutes to introduce you, of course, to the concepts of the book, which is why we're all here. Then we'll spend a good 25 minutes speaking with our guest speakers, Kate, Lucy, and Marcell, and Flor as well, to ask their questions around their take on what is a successful hybrid team, or what makes a hybrid team successful, rather. We will use the last 15 minutes to have the live Q&A with you all I was talking about. And as well, of course, we will draw the 5 winners of the prize draw. And for those of you who don't know, the draw is a signed copy of the book, of course. So we'll send a signed copy of the book to 5 winners today. So make sure you stay tuned until the end to know whether you've won. And at 6 p.m. we'll close with some closing remarks. So with that, I'd like to dive straight in the topic of hybrid work. For those of you who haven't noticed yet, we are going through what I believe is a revolution happening at work. I believe there is a revolution happening in the workplace. I think it's bigger than the introduction of emails and bigger than cloud adoption. And it's called hybrid work. And I believe it is changing fundamentally the way that teams work in a post-COVID economy through new technologies. We're all here on Zoom today, and social dynamics, people leaving the workplace, people entering the workplace. So this is, in my opinion, the third workplace revolution. And I believe, this is my belief, that only the teams that are mastering culture are really thriving in hybrid work. And I'd like to share some recent statistics or research with you, rather. This is a McKinsey research from 2020, showing that the COVID pandemic has had a big impact on workplace diversity. The COVID pandemic has pushed women, carers, parents, and other underrepresented groups out of the workforce, leading to lower workplace diversity. According to the World Economic Forum, it's going to take the time it will take to close the gender pay gap has increased from 90 years to 130 years since the pandemic. So as you can see, COVID, the pandemic, has had a real impact on diversity in the workplace, not just for women, but also for other underrepresented groups. But it's not just inclusion, it's not just diversity that has been impacted, inclusion has been impacted as well. This is another insightful research from McKinsey that shows that the COVID pandemic has actually decreased the sense of belonging and inclusion for many underrepresented groups. And I don't know if you can see the chart here, but essentially women are feeling much less included at work, in their workplace, than men. And also ethnic and racial minorities are feeling less included at work than non-minority respondents. So you can see that the COVID not only has had an impact on workplace diversity, but also has decreased a sense of belonging for many. And so this is what led me to write this book, really. I wanted to write about what makes a hybrid team successful when it comes to diversity and inclusion, of course, but also how do we attract talent? How do we attract diverse talent, makes them feel included, and we set them up for success in a hybrid workplace, which is very different from traditional, office work. And I believe this book or this topic is relevant not just to a small group of C-suite executive, but also to managers, anyone managing people, in fact, in hybrid work, HR professionals, of course, they have a big responsibility to look after their people, and entrepreneurs who are nowadays leading companies that are remote or hybrid first. So essentially, it's my belief that this book or this topic can be relevant to as many as all these groups. And so in my book, and obviously we won't have time to run through the entire book today because we'll be here in a lot of 4 hours or more, but I wanted to introduce to you the 4-pillar framework that I share in this book. Essentially, I articulated the strategies to create a successful hybrid team into 4 pillars based on a lot of research and stories, etc. And so I'll walk you through these 4 pillars before we open the floor, so to say, to our panelists today. So the first pillar is essentially you need to make sure you create a unified hybrid leadership team. What does that mean? It means that in remote work and hybrid work, more than ever before, we need to create a sense of unity, especially within the leadership team. And so with that, I wanted to share this story because I do think stories make it bring this more alive. So I don't know if you know the story of Xerox, the printing company Xerox. Essentially in 2001, the former CEO of Xerox, Anne Mulcahy, she found the company in a very difficult situation, in fact, on the verge of bankruptcy. And so, but what she did is, they were losing money. The organization had been losing money for 6 years in a row. But what she did when she came on board is she met personally with the top 100 executives of the company, and she let them know how challenging the situation was. And she asked them if they're prepared to commit. And a full 98 out of the 100 executives decided to stay with her. And the bulk of them are still at the company today. But one thing you need to know about Anne Mulcahy, that she was a champion of Xerox and its core values. And she had been working at Xerox for 24 years before she had been appointed to CEO. She really believed in the loyalty of customers and especially employees and executives. So this, the reason I love this story is because it's a true illustration of how if sharing values, sharing company values can really make an impact on how successful a team is. And although that story happened before the pandemic and before hybrid work, it really illustrates how unifying your leadership team can really make a positive difference. Of course, in a remote or hybrid work, you have to do it differently. And there are things I talk about in my book you can do, such as using values to unify, acting as a role model, setting the tone, setting common goals for your leadership team, for your leaders. I also believe in creating opportunities to co-lead projects together and scheduling informal time. If you think about people that are working remotely, scheduling informal time to share things outside the work can really be powerful. So this is the first pillar that I talk a lot about in this book. And then there is the second pillar, which is around building extreme transparency. And so what is transparency in the workplace? Well, it's essentially the idea of openly sharing information and knowledge in the attempt to benefit the entire business and employees. And again, I like to share this story, which I personally love this story because someone I really admire. I think we're all familiar with Richard Branson, obviously the British entrepreneur who founded Virgin Airlines, Virgin Media, and all the Virgin companies. What Richard Branson said in his autobiography, I don't know if you read his autobiography, Finding My Virginity, he talked about the huge role that social media played in the success of his company. And in particular, he shares a story which I find very funny around building transparency. He shared that one day, one of the customers of Virgin Airlines wrote the funniest complaint letter of all time. It was a customer that did not enjoy his meal on the Virgin flight. And he famously wrote a letter to Richard saying, well, answer me this, Richard, what sort of animal, I'm just laughing when I read it, what sort of animal would serve a dessert with peas in? How can you live like this? I can't imagine what dinner around your house is like. It must be like something out of a nature documentary. It was a very funny letter, essentially a complaint letter written by a customer. And so, what Richard Branson could have done is ignore it or pretend it never happened, but he actually approached it differently, say, I'm going to be very transparent with it. So he read the letter, obviously being Richard Branson, he immediately called the team in charge of menus to ask them to change the menu back to top standard. And the story really spread like wildfire on social media. And today you can still find this story online under the 5 best customer complaint letters of all time. And essentially, I believe that when business leaders embrace social media, for example, in a very authentic way, not in a unnatural or forced, but in an authentic way, they can really connect with their customers. And I do think that it's just an example to illustrate again that building extreme transparency, whether it's with your customers, with your employees, can really foster that sense of great culture. And there are ways you can do that in a remote work. So, for example, I talk about creating a flatter organization, creating employees to leadership communication channels, encouraging leaders to embrace social media, even though I know a lot of leaders who are not very comfortable with embracing social media, but it has to be in an authentic way, promoting open communication and attracting and retaining transparent people. And then I talk about the third pillar, which is over-communicating through all channels. I really believe that, especially in hybrid work, leaders must become the CROs, which is Chief Reminder Officers. And I really believe that we need to repeat ourselves over and over and over to the point of sounding like a broken record. Because I really believe that clarity reduces confusion, misunderstandings, and provides a clear purpose, building positive company culture. And so now I think you get the hang of it. I like to share stories. So I'm going to share a story of a legal firm that's a bit less well-known than Virgin Media. It's called Lankser Slacht. Forgive my pronunciation. So essentially that legal firm, Lankser Slacht, the day that the pandemic hit, the day that the COVID-19 pandemic hit and all the overnight companies were asked to start adopting remote work and work from home, overnight. It was a lucky day for them because they had just implemented their new intranet They had just literally just rolled out their intranet for company updates. And so they said that they saw immediate adoption rates that was close to 100%, meaning that all employees immediately started utilizing the new intranet. And some of their marketing manager recalls that they would never have seen it coming. It was a surprise for them to see that. And again, it's just an example of, you don't have to use intranet. Maybe you're going to use Slack, maybe you're going to use Microsoft Teams or whatever, another instant messaging tool. But really, it's important to ask your team what communication channel they prefer and how they want to use it. So things you can do in hybrid work to over-communicate through all channels. You can first and foremost assess or reassess your communication channels. Are they working? Are they being used or not? Is your team hating your certain tools? Probably yes. Maybe you can schedule strategic meetings. So we all have the problem of too many meetings, but really some meetings need to happen, sorts of one-to-one meetings. And I talk about that in my book, having the right balance between meeting specific people, but not too many meetings. I talk about you can cultivate empathy and appreciation in communication. So cultivating a culture of credit, for example. You can co-create a new communication framework. So how does your team want to operate moving forward with the new technologies being created constantly? Maybe your team wants to change the tools they're using to communicate. And also communicate with equity and inclusion in mind. Not everybody has the same access to technology, or maybe not everybody likes to use the same technology. So those are things you can consider. And then finally, the last and my personal favorite pillar is unifying cross-cultural teams through cultural awareness. What does that mean? It means that as remote work has become the new norm, and as hybrid work is the new norm, your team is suddenly more international, more global, across different continents. And with that, it means different cultures. And so I want to share this story of a company called Zoho. It's an Indian multinational online productivity tool. Some of you might know the company. And there's a story of Meera Sapra. She joined the Indian multinational company Zoho, working remotely out of New Delhi in India. And she quickly discovered that working so far away from the main headquarters, and also she had colleagues in the USA, meant that she had to evolve quickly in the way she worked and collaborated with her colleagues. And so she said that she noticed that what could get in the way are most not time difference, but rather cultural differences. And Mir observed that it can be indeed challenging for people from different cultures and different languages to work together, especially if they're not physically in the same location. So for example, Mira shared that the great Indian head bubble, which is the head shaking gesture, could mean any of these: good, I understand, yes, no. The answer is no, but I just don't want to say it. And the issue is that her American colleagues would not necessarily understand these, especially on a video conference call. So that's, again, it's an example of how working remotely and working hybrid, all of a sudden you work with people from different countries, different cultures, and things that usually make sense in an office environment are more complex all of a sudden, which is why it's even more important in hybrid work to integrate the cultural awareness piece into your development. So some of the things you can do in hybrid work to foster inclusion is you can first and foremost promote psychological safety and inclusion. And I know some of our guest speakers on this session will talk about that later. Some of the things you can do is consider language fluency and national communication norms. I know on this call today, we have people from different nationalities, different countries, and everybody, every country, every continent, every culture has different ways to communicate. You can encourage team building activities to build reports, if possible, and create cross-cultural awareness programs, because not everybody is aware of how Indian people like to work, how Chinese people like, how French people like to work, how American people like to work, and address conflict immediately. I've witnessed sometimes that working globally can create some conflict due to misunderstandings. It's very important to address conflict if you see one. And just before I open the floor, so to say, to our guest panelists, I want to finish talking about a few key concepts that are in the book. I talk a lot about promoting psychological safety. And psychological safety means essentially feeling free to speak up and to take risks without risk of repercussion. And so, for example, teams with psychological safety, they trust each other to experiment, they voice opinions freely, they bounce back after failure and mistake, they feel safe to take risk, and they can be vulnerable in front of each other. But teams with no psychological safety, they do not trust each other to experiment, they remain quiet instead of sharing ideas, they get blamed when mistakes happen, they fear taking risk, and they are not open to share ideas, which is why it's especially important in hybrid work to foster psychological safety. And so some innocent words or not so innocent sentences you might hear that are really harmful to create psychological safety could include, you should already know this, we already talked about this last week, or she made a mistake and that's why she did not succeed in that project, or you should remember that because we talked about it already. So those are some examples of harmful comments to watch out for, to really foster psychological safety in hybrid work. And I also talked a little bit about considering language fluency. Sometimes we forget that not everybody is English as a first language. And so people whose English might be their second or third language, for example, might not be as familiar with certain jargon or idioms. So for example, instead of saying, the ball is in your court, you can say, it's up to you to make a decision. Or instead of saying, it's a no-brainer, you might say, it's really obvious. Or instead of using acronyms, you can just spell it out how it is. So those are just examples that you can use, simple day-to-day, examples and strategies you can use to foster more psychological safety and also inclusion in your hybrid team. And then just last but not least, obviously conflicts. If conflict arises, like we talked about, in a very hybrid, very global international team with lots of different cultural differences, it's very important that you address conflict immediately. So things you can do is to document the conflict and gather the fact, try and stay as neutral as possible, acknowledge and discuss conflict openly. You can set ground rules and say, this is how we like to operate in this organization, act as a role model, and track productivity. So for example, if you see that one team's productivity is going down all of a sudden, maybe that's an indicator that there is a conflict. So those are all things you can do. And finally, the importance of meetings. We all spend a lot of hours in meeting. We all spend the majority of our days in meeting in hybrid work. And so how can you pay particular attention to your meetings dynamics to really foster diversity and inclusion? Well, there are a couple of things you can do. You can appoint a hybrid meeting facilitator, for example. You can pay attention to details like dynamics during the meeting, how people arrange themselves. You can use the round robin method, which is essentially asking each person to take a turn to answer the question. Or you can pair remote workers with office workers. Those are all examples. And with that, I would like to pass the mic, so to say, to our guest speakers today. Please continue to share your comments and your questions in the Q&A. I can see already a few questions in the Q&A. Continue to do so, to myself. But with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So Kate, I'll start with you. Could you please introduce yourself today?
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm Kate Smith. My pronouns are she, her. I work in CBRE's consulting team, so I help companies navigate the future of work and workplaces. We are a wonderfully diverse team, so we've got experts in HR, psychology, workplace design, wellbeing, inclusion, and digital. So we're superbly positioned to help organisations diagnose a lot of the challenges. I'm also the co-chair of CBRE's Women's Network, exec sponsor of our Next Gen programme, so looking after our apprentices and graduates. And I'm also a mum to 2 wonderful teenagers and a very noisy Airedale Terrier.
Thank you, Kate. I love that, all those details. I love knowing that about you. Lucy, over to you. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. So 8 Roads Ventures is a global venture capital firm. We manage around 11 billion of assets across offices globally, the UK, China, India, Japan, and the US. We started around 50 years ago in Boston as Fidelity International, and we have invested in around 300 companies globally to date. really foster partnerships, close working relationships with our founders. And I guess my role as head of talent and ecosystem is centered around adding value to those 45 hypergrowth portfolio companies across Europe and Israel that we've invested in, and really sort of helping them with their people and talent strategies and working in close partnership with them. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Lucy. And thanks for being here today. And over to you, Marcell. If you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marcell. I work for Adidas. I'm pretty sure some of you may know what the brand is. It's a global sportswear manufacturer. So we make trainers, football boots, apparel, fashion apparel, etc., all over the world. And my role within that is global talent acquisition. So my core responsibility is finding or sourcing talents for certain roles all over the Adidas business. I also sit as one of the co-chairs of the chair and co-chair of our ERG, so one of our employee resource groups, which is the Unity group. We dedicate time and resource focused on race equity and Black heritage within the Adidas organization. And I also consult the Adidas business on its inclusion, equity and diversity policies and strategy as well. So ensuring that we are driving and fostering inclusion throughout the different facets and entities of our Adidas business globally.
Thank you, Marcell. Thanks for being here. And also, Flor, if you could introduce yourself. I know you will do it later as well, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself as well, Flor.
Yeah, hello, I'm Floor Martens. By my name, you can tell I'm from the Netherlands, now living in Newcastle in the UK. I joined Inspired Human about 3 months ago, and I will do the Q&A later on, so I'll keep it short.
Thank you, Flor. All right. So obviously we've introduced the topic of hybrid work and some of the challenges that come with hybrid work, as well as some of the opportunities that come with hybrid work. So I'd like to start with you, Kate. When we were preparing this session, we talked about some of some of your clients at CBRE. What are they doing with hybrid work? What do you see some of the clients of CBRE maybe struggling with when it comes to hybrid work? And also, what do you see some of the clients at CBRE seeing a lot of success when it comes to hybrid work? Can you and how are they moving forward with the whole hybrid work?
Sure, yeah. I guess if I start with what people are struggling with, it might sound quite familiar. A lot of people or companies are in the same place, but they're actually a little bit more now uncertain when it comes to their plans for the future of work than maybe they were last year. I think this reflects the challenges that companies are facing in implementing effective hybrid working. And also attracting people to spend regular time at the office. But this is also, of course, in the context of other big shifts. You mentioned some of them, but we've got inflationary and pay pressures. We've got the cost of living crisis, the Great Resignation, digitization, global social movements. So there's a lot of factors which keep changing work effectively. And for many board level, there's board level pressure to say, well, do we just need to mandate people to come back? That seems like a simple answer. This hybrid stuff is really quite difficult. But actually the data and the experience that we're seeing is that mandates can really negatively impact engagement and they can drive attrition. And they're actually really ineffective in actually getting more people back to the office because a lot of employees are just saying no. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's clear that companies are really struggling with hybrid work. Mm-hmm. It's quite a complex and emotive for both the employees who have adapted their work and their personal lives around remote work or hybrid work, but also for leaders who are quite concerned about employee engagement, about productivity, about culture. So what we're doing and I'll give some examples of what we're working with clients, I think, who are starting to get it right or moving in the right direction. And if anyone tells you they've got the playbook and they've got it all sorted, they're definitely fibbing, because there is no one playbook, there is no one size fits all. And I'll probably repeat that all the way through the Q&A. Mm-hmm. We're working with a big takeaway delivery company, and I won't name names. I know it's nicer to name them, but it's a public webinar, so I need to not. Where we're looking at the workplace experience. So looking at how their spaces actually work in terms of hybrid readiness, functionality, community, services, digital, well-being, inclusion, and actually doing an analysis of their entire portfolio and producing a plan. And then they've got an investment plan. There's not many companies who have an endless budget to change offices, but there's a prioritized investment plan that helps them change their offices to work in a hybrid way. Equally, then we're working with a big publishing company to help them really establish their approach to hybrid. So putting in the right hybrid infrastructures and routines. So that is coaching their leadership team, delivering manager training and individual training. And I think we're seeing a massive difference when companies are investing in training on hybrid. It's like anything. If you just put a policy out and say, there you go, everybody do it, people won't know what to do. So training is really important, but also things like team charters. So you're actually allowing teams to have a conversation, facilitating how they're going to work together in a hybrid way, but also then just having a process of test, learn, assess, evolve, and figuring out how we make this hybrid work for different teams in different ways. And then we're also working with a banking organization around behavioral change. So this is about considering what the enablers are and the blockers are to change, then thinking about what those behavioral nudges could be. And I love the science around behavioral nudges. And then delivering that behavioral change campaign that really takes what you've set out as your vision you want to achieve in hybrid working and just nudging people in the right direction. But if you haven't got the workplace environment right or the technology right, then people are just going to bounce off the nudging. If you're nudging them to come back to the office or you're nudging them to work in a certain way, we've also got to make that whole thing frictionless. So those are just a few examples where people are starting to move in the right direction.
I love those examples, Kate, and please, to our audience today, continue to share your questions. I've seen a really interesting question so far, but continue to share your questions for our panelists. If you have any question on what they're saying, or any comment or any stories, please share them. We want it to be very interactive. But Kate, on your point around what you're seeing companies doing, I'd love to ask the question to Lucy, because I know Lucy is working with a lot of portfolio companies at 8 Roads. You have obviously a lot of portfolio companies you're supporting and funding. So Lucy, I'll be interested to understand, if you look at the portfolio companies of 8 Roads, what are they doing to foster diversity and inclusion in hybrid work? Because to Kate's point, it sounds like a lot of companies haven't it all figured out. A lot of companies are still trying to figure it all out. What do you see working within your portfolio companies at 8 Roads?
Very true. And I think firstly, we've been requesting more tracking from our portfolios to really understand, what do we need to solve for, and where are we with, hybrid working, with diversity and inclusion more generally, and with how this sort of workplace is now shifting. So things like EPNS, diversity metrics, inclusion assessments. We've also deliberately made investments that focus and zone in on hybrid working and inclusion specifically. GLOAT, to mention one, which promotes internal mobility within large companies, HiBob, another, who are on a mission to transform how organizations operate in the modern world of work with its HR platform, Bob. And we actually recently launched a Young Generation in Tech report in partnership with HiBob, which really highlighted some interesting findings on how young people are responding to the new hybrid world. And we surveyed 2,000 workers in the tech industry between the ages of 20 and 30 across 7 countries in Europe, really exploring the knock-on effects of the changing working patterns that we're now seeing, the need for job security in turbulent times, the rise of hybrid remote working on young people's workplace lives. And we actually found that flexible working models were a key source of tension, which isn't surprising, for young workers. And that's over 35% who actually were voting themselves out as people that were potentially going to leave in the next 12 months if they weren't feeling secure and weren't seeing that there was going to be some promotion on the horizon for them. And I think a lot of that has come from the lack of security that hybrid work has actually encouraged, and sadly it's difficult to get it right in all of those cases. So a number of people are potentially leaving the market, which is concerning for younger startups who can't yet afford to recruit more senior talent. When it comes to fostering belonging, there's loads of great examples of things we're doing. At Spendesk, employees can volunteer at a charity helping their communities during their free time. At Duro, employees can start a club. We're thinking, book clubs, wine clubs, with owners getting £20 per member to forge an activity. And then at a fund level, we found that the pandemic was a useful time to really step back and think about how we're giving our investors the freedom to work in their own way, finding styles, methods to really suit them. And some of the members of our investing team live 2 hours outside of London, for instance, and have young children. We've got a very diverse team here, and actually a couple have moved home. A couple have now gone back to Paris over the pandemic. We found really sort of unique ways of collaborating. We use Slack, we use WhatsApp, we use various other ways of communicating between us as a team. And it's, you know, I think we've also seen that coming into the workplace needs to have a different feel. So an important opportunity to have fun, to come together, to build community in a different way, to make sure that those relationships are front of mind. So coming into the office now isn't just about working, it's about creating a culture and a community between us. And I think that's something that we try and take into the interactions with our portfolio as well, just being aware of the importance of culture and how we measure that and how we look at the impact and continuously reassess what we're doing to support those things.
Great contribution, Kate. Sorry, Lucy, so much you've shared. I love how you talked about the importance of culture. How do we create culture in hybrid work? That's challenging in itself. By the way, lots of great questions coming through in the Q&A. Please keep them going. We will answer your very, very good questions in a minute. So continue to share your questions in the Q&A. That's a nice segue, actually, Lucy. You talked about culture in hybrid work. I'd like to hand it over to Marcell, because Marcell, when we were preparing this session, we talked about when people go to the office, when hybrid workers go to the office, is it, you know, are they supposed to just be in the office to do the work, or are they coming to the office to do the culture thing and connect with the remote? Like, can you share with us your thoughts on when people are working remotely and maybe on their Slack, it shows inactive, and some of the maybe misconceptions of office worker when they see a coworker with an inactive Slack? And also when people come to the office, you know, should they be just working or should they also be connecting? What about the culture elements? So a lot of questions into one, Marcell, but hopefully you can answer them.
No, really, really good questions. And I guess it just follows on nicely from what Lucy was saying, I think, because I think as we've seen with hybrid working since the pandemic, you know, lots of people are starting to return to the office, lots of people obviously aren't. And there tends to be, what I've seen is certainly in leadership, hesitancy to see what people are actually doing or understand what they're actually doing when they're not in the office. It's very easy to see what your co-worker's doing when they're 6 feet away from you versus behind a computer screen or not necessarily on Slack or on Microsoft Teams. And when that icon goes to yellow, I hear it all the time around, well, we don't know what they're doing. They must not be working. The employees, they'll come and speak to me and say, you know, often I feel like I have to be on green, or I have to be on red, or I have to be on do not disturb to show that I am doing things, when actually I'm just nipping off to the bathroom, or I'm going to get a coffee, or I've had a delivery, or I'm going to pick my children up from school. That ties very much into the psychological safety elements for me. You know, we have to foster more inclusion around people who aren't necessarily in the office, encourage them, understand our employees. And I love just getting to know people a little bit more in terms of how do they work, what times do they actually start work versus what times they finish. You know, when we're in the office environment, how many times do we go and get a coffee, you know, go and nip to the other area of the office to have a little bit of a chat around a project, or just a chat about somebody's life or something along those lines. When you're at home, it's a very different environment. And sometimes employees can feel guilty for having that time for themselves, for having that time to check the news, to go and make a coffee, go and answer the door, speak to their neighbor, do something for their child, or whatever it may be. And we need to, as leaders, and what I see working really, really well is when leaders actually don't question the yellow tick on Slack or the yellow dot on Microsoft Teams. They don't check in and say, what are you up to? Or put sly little messages in and say, are you okay? You know, and I don't mean that in a health and safety kind of way or a well-being way. I mean, you know, the subtle kind of monitoring elements. But coming back to when you are in the office, going to Lucy's point, the office environment has now changed so much, right? So take it, if you are a hybrid operator, office environments now should be a place where you communicate with the people. You're doing people-related projects. You're working as a team. You don't need to be going in the office anymore and locking yourself in a meeting room. That's no different from being at home. That doesn't drive inclusion. That doesn't foster well-being. It doesn't even increase that interactivity. If anything, it's just showing that you turned up to another meeting room or another space in a corporate environment. So when people are in the office, some of the biggest successes I've seen is bringing people together, work on projects together. There's a task that you've not necessarily managed to do recently. Get on it as a team, talk about each other, get to know each other, get some training courses and coaching together. They're the biggest successes that I see that drive inclusion, especially for hybrid work models right now.
Thank you, Marcell. Lots of very insightful. I like how you share that getting people together, creating that culture element is so important in hybrid work even more. And I was just wondering whether, hearing all the thoughts you all shared, whether certain groups, certain underrepresented groups perhaps are more at risk of being remote workers and therefore more, not out of sight, out of mind. And by that, I mean, perhaps parents of young children, perhaps new moms of young children, perhaps carers. Are those types of population demographics more likely to be working from home and therefore out of sight, out of mind, and therefore, with unconscious bias, not being top of mind when it comes promotion time? And maybe it's a question for Kate or Lucy. You've unmuted yourself, great. So both of us, but maybe Kate, I know as the chair of the Women Network at CBRE, maybe you hear a lot of what women are saying in your organization. What's your view on, do you think that certain groups are more at risk of being out of sight, out of mind, being in hybrid or remote work?
I think if you don't implement hybrid correctly, then absolutely. I think all the data, and lots of us will have stats to quote and surveys that we can name that say pretty much all the underrepresented groups have a preference for hybrid for one reason or another, whether it, as you say, it's for caring responsibilities, but also office environments were often places where you encounter acts of exclusion, or some people use the term microaggressions. I don't like that, because micro sounds like it's small, but it doesn't feel small. So there are lots of reasons why offices were not great places, and in many cases are still not great places. And then if you couple that with maintaining a culture of presenteeism, as you say, where people are saying those in the office are those the ones I'm going to see, going to promote, going to give stretch projects to, you are going to set your diversity and inclusion and equity agenda backwards if you implement hybrid badly. But if you actually consciously think about how do I make sure that people, regardless of where they're working, are going to get the same recognition, the same, like you talked about some brilliant inclusion activities within meetings. That's a critical point. But actually, you've got to think about that from onboarding through to learning and development. All of your key processes, if you do truly successfully want to become a hybrid company, you need to rethink them. You can't just say, this is the way we've done it always, now we're just going to flip and some people won't be here all of the time. You've got to think, how do we redesign some of these really key moments that matter in an employee life cycle and make them truly hybrid?
Yeah. And Marcell, please share.
I think, Kate, you brought up some really, really good points. And I think it takes successful leaders, open leaders, culturally intelligent leaders as well, to realize and recognize some of the points that Kate mentioned, especially around when we talk about promotions and, if you're not seen, you're forgotten about kind of thing. And when we are coming to those promotional rounds or those recruitment rounds where we're elevating or looking for new talent, somebody that's in that room that can question and challenge the people that are in those tick boxes, just because they're in the office and you see them visibly, are they necessarily the right person that are performing, etc. So really, really good points you're raising, Kate. I'm thankful that you brought them up and shared them today.
Thanks.
And equally,
Lucy, yes. Yeah.
I was just going to add, equally, we've seen that the shift has moved from, the control moved to the employee rather than the employer. So I think it's really important now, going back to my point around culture, to think about how you're bringing your employee value proposition and brand proposition to life. How are you attracting people? Your culture is not always obvious now because people aren't always together in that office space now. It's a case of sort of breaking it and resetting it, thinking about who you want to be as a brand. It's no longer just a case of being a brand and therefore you're going to attract. You've got to have messages that go way beyond that. You've got to think about how you're reiterating your views around inclusion and diversity and really bringing those to life in your brand proposition as you're trying to attract people. I think those messages are very important, and language is another important factor of all of that. Making sure that the language that you use around your EVP is not biased, that you're taking the bias out of that language and you're being more deliberate about how you're bringing your strategy to life from a people perspective. I think those things are now very important.
Absolutely. I love what the three of you just shared around culture, leaders, sort of courageous leader, brave leaders who really want to make an impact. Those are very important. So I'd like to thank you, Kate, Lucy, Marcell, for your contributions. Please keep them coming. I can see we have a lot of great questions in the Q&A. So I'd like to pass it over to you, Flor, for the Q&A with the audience, because I can see lots of great questions. So Flor, with that, over to you.
I will try. I think some of them have been answered meanwhile, but I'll pick a couple because I'm also conscious of the time. It was actually an anonymous question about quiet staff. So of course, people that are, might be a bit more introverted or don't share that much. And now with hybrid, more working from home, the person was concerned about missing out on what actually those persons might normally contribute. What are your thoughts on that? And who would like to answer, or maybe some of you would like to?
I can start by just talking quickly about neurodiversity. And I think it's a topic that is become increasingly of interest and spoken about by companies and office occupiers. So quiet people might sometimes be neurodiverse colleagues. So it's good as an organization to make sure everyone understands neurodiversity and also thinks about how we design hybrid working, how we design office spaces to encompass neurodiverse design principles. So making sure that you've got a choice of settings in an office space, so people can actually come to the office. I know a lot of people want to come to the office to be in a noisy, vibrant, collaborating space, but some people may need to go and be in a quiet, low stimulating space to be able to do effective work. So providing that space and that choice is really important. And then, as I think I said before, making sure that you are building processes that recognize everybody in the company and not those that are the noisiest and the most present in the office.
That's really true. And it's also going back to the point around community, knowing each individual within, your team, within the environment that you're in. We have people in our team, for instance, who fast at certain times during the day. There's religious beliefs to take into consideration, the requirements that people have from a religious perspective when it comes to the space in the office, for instance. It's just being mindful of those things. And I think if you're a very cohesive team that really know each other and have come together in different ways and really understand each other, you're more mindful of those aspects, and you can be a little bit more sympathetic to those requirements.
Thank you for those answers. So I saw another question. It's interesting with hybrid, it's about working from home, working in the office. And it seemed that the previous question was about, both sides. So I see another question, which is interesting. So it's like you have people that can actually not work from home, right? So in certain companies, this might, we talk about work-life balance and all those improvements, and then there are some people that can just not make use of it because they just need to be in the office. And so also as leaders, how do you, which kind of messaging do you use also for this group of people that cannot work hybrid?
I'm happy.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, Kate, go ahead.
No, you start, Perrine.
I was going to ask, that's a good question, a long question. Do you mind rephrasing that for me, Flor? Sorry, I think I lost the track of the...
So that some people cannot work hybrid because they're in operational roles. And then as a leader, what's your message to them? Because they might not be able to, make use of the benefits.
Marcell, do you want to take that one? I saw you raised your hand earlier, or was it for the previous question, maybe?
Yeah, it was for the previous question. Yeah. And I know Kate wants to come in on this one, but I will just add a little snippet of my experience within this element, because we do have people who have to come into the office from an operational lens. And I think it's coming back to, what does your office stand for? What does your company stand for from a culture, community, policy perspective? So if they're not able to work from home or in a hybrid way, what are we still providing to them from a parental support situation, from celebrating cultural moments in time, for example? What are the other attributes that can obviously benefit them as well if they are being not made to, but having to actually sit within an office environment? So looking at those nuances as well, I think will certainly support their levels of inclusion, so they're not feeling left out.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to start by reminding us all that those office workers and knowledge workers are a minority. There are a lot of people who are not office workers. So actually, it's only the minority who have a privilege of potentially working in a hybrid way. And then, of course, within that, you've got a whole variety. I think for me, it comes down to the why. So you've got to be able to explain to each employee in various roles why they need to work in a certain way, and giving them clarity on what's expected, but also what they can expect So it's very clear if someone has a role for a compliance reason or for a customer service reason that they need to be in that workspace 5 days a week, you can explain that and give the why. If you want somebody to be in a certain number of days a week, you need to give them the why and explain why it is better for them, for the business, for your clients to be together. If you want people to be fully remote, give them the why and discuss and make sure that that's really clear. If people understand the why, I think you're getting a lot more traction, and that gives you the ability to also then explain the why to a whole range of colleagues who'll be working in different ways.
Thank you. And then another one from Chloe. She's like an international tech recruiter. So she says, like, especially maybe the millennials or so, or I don't want to generalize, but so they say they want to work as like, they want to have a working lifestyle as a digital nomad. But then they encounter the issues that some companies are now saying, we actually want you to work hybrid. So you do have to come into the office now and again. Yeah, what can you say about that issue?
I think it comes back to the power point around the power shifted to the employee versus the employer. You know, we need to also think about the backdrop of the fact that there are 2 million vacancies in tech that were listed between May 2021 and 22, and that's from a total of 14.5 million across the economy as a whole. So there's a big risk to us sort of continuing to sort of find a dearth of talent in this space if we don't listen to, you know, what's sort of coming back in terms of the new needs of people in this sort of very new world of work that we're now in. You know, things are constantly changing and shifting, as we've all sort of highlighted. And I think it just goes back to just being aware of everyone's requirements. Some people have children, some people, you know, want to come into the office, which is great. Some people, for whatever reason, just you know, cannot come into an office. Maybe they live a little bit further away, or maybe they were attracted to the idea of being remote right from day one in their role. So I think it's just a case of thinking about talent generally, bringing the best talent in regardless of their requirements, and then making it work for the individual.
I think quite a few organisations have actually offered not full digital nomad, but a longer period where you can work abroad. So it's sort of I think I've seen between 4 and 8 weeks for some organisations of saying you can go and work abroad during our employment to go and do that. So it's not giving full freedom to be digital nomad, but a nod towards that being a preference as well.
Yeah, I would second what you both just said. We all read the newspaper. There is the war for talent, and I think Marcell knows that best because as his position, you know, talent acquisition, there is a war for talent. So companies need to think outside of the box. You know, they want to hire people, they want to grow. Companies, employers need to think outside the box. How can we recruit more people of color? How can we recruit more women? How can we recruit more disabled individuals? We need to think outside of the box to find those people, find that talents, and set them up for success. It's not enough to rest on our laurels and just expect, you know, the same thing that we've done for the last 50 years to work in these new dynamics. We need to, you know, be forward thinking, explore new ways to attract diverse talents. That's the only way forward.
Yeah, and I think only 1 or 2 more questions also, given the time. I saw that Steve and Shirley had a question that like touched upon each other about performance management. So the question is, in short, if we should move from the hours, like, you know, you have to make 8 hours a day, and that we look at that, or is it actually just get your work done, and I don't care about, you know, if you do it in 4 hours or 5 hours.
Who wants to answer this one?
I don't mind coming in on this one. And again, this is subject to people's opinion, obviously. But for me, I think the old hourly model in certain professions is a little bit outdated. You know, if you, for example, in my profession, if you try and task me to 37.5 hours a week, that's not realistic. Often I'm way over that, or on some days I'm way under. You know, not every single day is the same. You know, I can work 6 hours one day, 4 hours another day, 12 hours another day, depending on my situation. And I think as employers and as talent acquisition professionals and leaders, we employ people to do a job. And I think once you understand the individual we're bringing into the organization, we set them clear roles, responsibilities, guidelines, objectives, KPIs, whatever it may be that you've set them as part of your organization. If they're achieving those objectives. For me, it doesn't matter how long it takes them to achieve those or how short it takes them to achieve those objectives. When I come into those conversations with individuals about, okay, well, I've done my tasks, for example, within 5 hours, I've apparently still got 3 hours left in the working day. I say to the individuals, well, there's 3 hours there of development. There's 3 hours of there for yourself to unwind, de-stress, sort your mental health out, wherever it may be. Or there's 3 hours there to go and explore some added value somewhere else, to improve a process that you're currently working on. You know, don't necessarily be defined by the 8 hours. Go and find time to do what you need to do, whether it's to enhance your profession or your well-being. I think that's a bit more of an open model and a more open approach. I know that doesn't fit every organization or every company, but if you're in organizations or roles similar to myself, that's what I feel or I've seen is working quite well.
Kate, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And I think what you're saying is trust. And I think trust is the key word. If you're building a culture that's based on trust, then you don't need to check the yellow dot, or you don't need to define hours and performance manage. You are thinking about outputs and outcomes. Do you hire people so that you're never going to trust them, or do you hire them in your hiring process so that you're going to trust them and invest in them and so on? Or are you going to be suspicious always and not trusting? It's a very strange mindset to me to come from a position of not trusting. So it's I do believe we are evolving and thinking about the gig economy and so on around to more of an output based working, but it's going to take a huge cultural and mindset shift for a lot of leaders.
Yeah, and related, like I read someone also asked about a work-life balance, which is of course is related to the hours, because what we also of course hear in lots of research that instead of people actually, you know, when they might be done in 5 hours and then taking it 3 hours, they might take on another project or just keep going and work 10 hours, right? So as a leader, how do you manage that for employees?
It's positive role modeling in some respects. As a leader, you know, you want to role model, you know, a positive, you know, work-life balance, whether that's, you know, demonstrating that you're taking a lunch break, you're spending time actually speaking to people when you're in the office, you're not just sitting there, you know, with your head down and not interacting. I think it's really important to be present when you're in the office, as we were sort of saying before, and to role model positive behaviours around work-life balance. I think that goes a long way when it comes to really sort of building that cohesion across the team.
I have one client who actually monitors the time that people are online, not from a bad checking that they're working, but actually to look at those who are spending too much time online, and actually sends alert to a line manager to say, this person is, I'm just flagging to you that you might want to have a conversation because this person appears to be online too much, which I thought was a nice use of what some people are fearing Big Brother, but actually using technology positively. And there's quite a lot of those technology platforms that you can use that start to focus on how much time you're online, how much time you've had focused time. So companies who are using that data and those tools, those technology tools, quite positively to look at work-life balance, I think have got it kind of building that in systemically and using the technology well.
Yes, I've noticed there are still a couple of questions left, but it's, well, at least in the UK, it's almost 6 and people might have other things. So I just want to close for this part before Perrine takes over with the final remarks. We have 5 books to give away, signed by Perrine, and I have 5 names, so some people might be cheering behind their laptop soon. So it's Andres Torres, Karen Conway, Georgina Owens, Sonia Vasilev, and Rebecca Richter. So those are the 5.
A virtual round of applause to the 5 winners. Thank you to be honest, you deserve it. You've spent an hour with us, you know, you've asked questions, you've interacted with us, you've all deserved the books. Thank you, Flor, for moderating the Q&A session. Thank you to our guests, 3 guests today, Kate, Lucy, Marcell, for spending the time with us. Obviously, this wouldn't be a book launch event without me sharing some book praise for my book. So I have to have that obligatory praise shared with you. There are a couple of people who have had the honor to read the book first and foremost before it was published. So Jay Fulcher is an author, and he obviously spoke highly of the book. Christina Galindo is a HR head in financial services, also spoke highly about the book. Gary Ridge, some of you might know him. He's the culture, otherwise known as the culture coach. Also spoke highly about the book. And finally, Sarah Burbidge, who is head of change at the BBC. So if that session today hasn't given you at least an interest in the book, hopefully those phrases should. But essentially, I would like to thank all of you for spending an hour of your time with us today. I do believe that our time is our most valuable currency. So if you chose to spend an hour with us, I really, really appreciate that. I really do. But essentially, for me, I want to leave you with two thoughts. The first one is hybrid work has transformed workplace dynamics, as we've seen, from a diversity perspective, from an inclusion perspective. And I personally believe that only teams that have the right strategies, the right methodology, like all of our panelists shared today, are set up for success, even though a lot of companies haven't it all figured out, as we said. So my new book shares exactly that, some strategies that any company can use, follow to really build, to attract the right talents and set them up for success in hybrid work. If you're interested, of course, the book is available on amazon.com.co.uk. So I'd really appreciate it if you could perhaps purchase the book, or obviously not the winners, because the winners we just announced are going to receive a copy. But for those of you who haven't won the book, obviously you can find the book on amazon.com. And obviously if you could leave a review, that would really help other readers find the book. So if you purchase the book on Amazon, I'd appreciate if you could leave a review. But with that, I want to thank you one more time for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists, Kate, Lucy, Marcell, our moderator, Floor, and all of you who attended today. Thank you for your time, and have a good rest of the day, evening, wherever you are. Thank you.